Interviewees, what was something an employer said to you during an interview that made you not want to work for them?
The employer asked me if I was comfortable confronting thieves, or taking things out of people's hands and pockets if they tried to steal. It was a high theft store in a bad part of town, and she wanted me to work night shifts alone while I did this. I'm a 5'3", 130-pound unathletic girl. I'm not getting my ass kicked for a bag of chips. I work at another store in the same chain now. I found out that this is completely against company policy, and recently had a meeting about someone who was shot and killed for trying to chase a thief.
I was applying for an unpaid internship as part of my master's degree. The interviewer showed up 30 minutes late to the interview with no explanation, other than,
"I lost track of time.
I'm not going to work for you for free, if you're going to treat me like shit."
Similar theme. I had an interview once where the person I should have been interviewing with was at lunch during our scheduled interview time, but on top of that, it was also a surprise to them that this particular position existed, not that it was open, that it even existed. It was on your effing website, and you contacted me to do an interview. What the f? She told me that the team I would be working with had a lot of interpersonal issues, to the point where they couldn't fill out their own schedule without someone from HR mediating. Later on in the interview I asked her why she liked working there, which prompted a long awkward silence, followed by a half-assed response.
"They pay me money. Money can be exchanged for goods and services. Goods and services ensure my continued existence. Existence is something that I've chosen to embrace."
This is why I always ask what the interviewer likes about working there when they ask me if I have any questions. The amount of times they've just gone silent is hilarious.
When I was interviewing for a summer internship, I was asked if I just saw this as a stepping stone.
Laughing my ass off. It's an internship.
Do you have non-stepping stone internships?
Hi, no. Intern is actually my end goal. I'd like to do this all my life.
Me, what are your actual hours? Like, if I looked at your employee sign in and sign out book, what would I see? The employer says,
"Well, we work hard, but we try to be reasonable, and?"
I glance over at the rows of desks. They're full of people. It's 7:15 p.m.
We also have an office-wide conference call every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. with our main office in Adelaide.
No thanks.
I forget the actual wording, but he said something about how everyone who worked there hated him and was out to get him, and he wanted to make sure I would take his side.
If everyone around you is a jerk, then chances are, you're the jerk.
If you smell shit all day, you need to check your shoe.
Interview for a transcriptionist job. Me, with 20 years experience. I had just moved to a new town. Older lady gives me the test tape and says it's timed, and I shouldn't feel bad if I can't finish it all in an hour. I type up the 5 very short and medically easy reports in about 15 minutes, that includes proofreading them, and checking to make sure that was all of them. I tell her I'm finished and she's all flustered.
Already?
And goes and has a confab with another older woman. They acted like I must have cheated somehow, and I leave, never hear back. Got a call from them 6 months later. I would have starved to death by then, asking if I was still interested. Nope. Interviewed at Kaiser Permanente for the same kind of job. Was hired immediately at top wage based on my experience, not starting wage like most places do it. KP is a good place to work in my honest opinion.
You totally cheated with all that practice.
Yeah, that's not fair for the rest of the applicants, who don't have 20 years of experience.
If the ones hiring you also performed the same job, they probably thought you made them look bad, and that's why they didn't hire you.
The thought occurred on that one. Transcription was in a weird state at the time. They desperately needed people, but it was only a few years later that voice recognition put a lot of people out of work. I was glad they didn't hire me. I heard nothing good about that department and hospital from then on. Being new in town, I got lucky.
Was being interviewed by a large West Coast search engine company several years ago. One of the interviewers noticed I had a thick Southern accent and asked where I was from. I said Kentucky, and he asked me if it was true that a lot of people from there marry their cousins, and if anyone in my family had done that. He was dead serious and wouldn't move on, until I answered. I said no, and he looked at me like he didn't believe me. Super awkward. In the next interview, that guy's boss, he asked how my other interviews had gone, so I mentioned the remark, and he seemed very put off, that I even brought it up. Interview went really cold after that, got a call from them a week later and said I wouldn't be offered a job. A month later they called me back and asked if I was still interested and I declined.
Applied at a local hotel while in college, was advertised as, checking people in, cash handling, computer experience needed, etc. I'm made to wait over an hour after scheduled interview time, then the manager tells me that I will be working completely alone in the hotel with no help. I will be required to do front desk, food prep, housekeeping, go in rooms alone with guests, etc. All while making $8 an hour. I politely declined. Edit. By go in rooms alone with guests I meant that if their toilet was clogged, I had to fix it. If they needed their TV fixed, it was me. Change the sheets? Me, alone with no one else to know I was there, no security. I'm 5 foot tall and at the time weighed like 110.
Could you just, run my hotel for near minimum wage? Cool.
Unfortunately, most hotels are.
Could you just run this for minimum wage?
But most expect guests to change their own shit/piss sheets and have at least one other employee on staff, so you aren't lured into a room and murdered.
In college I interviewed for a position listed as maintaining the school website, got to the interview and they started listing all these other responsibilities like help desk support, server maintenance, in-house apps. Then the guy follows up by saying, it's about 40 hours a week of work, but their rules say they can only pay for the first 20 hours, and the rest could be done on my own time. Also paid minimum wage, not sure if they ever filled the position. Went in for a bartending job at a new chain restaurant that was opening up. At this point I had 10 years experience, but I also had about a year going on at my day job, which was actually going to be my career. I still wanted to bartend though, because that money is too good to ever walk away from completely. So I go in and there's 2 interviewers, the GM of the new opening store and some hiring coordinator from their corporate office. They are interviewing the guy before me with the door open. I hear the woman ask what kind of experience he has, and when he tells her she says,
well, that's not really a high volume place, we need people that can handle high volume.
And she sent him on his way. So I go in next, and we start talking and she says,
oh, it says here you don't want to work any weekday day shifts, why is that?
I tell her I have another job and she tells me they aren't hiring anyone that doesn't have completely open availability. I said, didn't you just tell the guy before me that you wanted people who could handle high volume? For the last 10 years I've bartended at the highest volume bar in Philadelphia. You're really not going to hire me because of schedule restrictions? She said they wanted open availability and asked if I'd maybe consider leaving my other job. I laughed, literally laughed at her and said, lady, I'm making $40,000 a year there, and I pretty much just started. I'm not going to give that up. To work lunch. Then I thanked them and walked out. The GM followed me out and said he wanted to hire me, because he knew who I was, through an old coworker of mine, and that she was just being a bitch. He said if I changed my availability on the application he could promise me I'd never be scheduled a weekday day shift. So I switched it and got the job, and he stood by his word. It's funny because the interviewer was the one I didn't want to work for, but once the interview was done I never saw her again. She never worked in the actual store at all.
The employer was a publisher. First they told me about the job, which was basically the entire duties of a graphic artist plus the entire duties of a web programmer put together, and honestly, at the time there were undoubtedly only a handful of people, including myself, who could do the job in the first place. Then they told me how marvelous the company was going, with X billion dollars of profit in the last year, and how this meant I'd have a bright future there with lots of stability. I gave some thought to what they were asking me to do, what I was already earning, being just a web programmer without the graphic art duties, and what I'd want to earn for that job. I decided that I wouldn't consider it, without a $30,000 raise. We got around to the discussion of what they were willing to pay for the position, and the number they mentioned was a $5,000 pay cut from what I was already earning. I explained that this was, frankly, insulting, and that they had no business wasting the time of the best people in the industry with interviewing for such a ridiculous salary. They told me that they're the publishing industry, and publishers traditionally pay less than other employers for the same job. I asked why. They said it was because publishing is a low profit margin industry. so I pointed out that they had some nerve to try to claim poverty to me after their little lecture about how many $1 billion of profit they'd made last year. Then I stood up and walked out. No way in hell was I ever going to work for that employer.
Was it Pearson?
Of course. Fresh out of college, I applied for a job as a developer at a company that made advert games and edu games. This was about 10 years ago, when Flash games were huge and many companies wanted branded Flash games. Had a great interview. On the way in I was shown around the office, nice people, interesting customers, cool projects, made a great impression with my portfolio, was told I was the last candidate, and they were sufficiently impressed that we'd go straight ahead with the salary and benefits negotiation, which also went fine. At this point it was 5-ish and they'd send me the paperwork for the contract, but since it was the end of the day, perhaps I'd like to see how they spend their evenings at this company. Okay? I was taken to a large attic space, big enough to stand freely but no windows. There were logs, like big real tree trunks placed around a fake campfire on one side of the attic. On the other side were tents, like proper camping tents with sleeping bags and stuff. I was asked if I played any instruments because every night they'd come up here with the whole group of employees, play music together around the fake campfire while they had dinner, then they'd go back to work for a few more hours and sleep in the tents, so they could start early in the morning. Apparently most people only went home on the weekend. I was just so absolutely stumped that I didn't even decline the job on the spot. I just thanked them for the interview, got on the train home and just sat there mulling it over, declined the job over the phone the next day, and the manager actually got pretty mad, because he already accepted a job from a client and scheduled me on it.
That sounds like a cult, not a job.
After I told him my greatest strength was being a team player, he told me,
That sounds like some commie pinko bullshit. This is America, where there's an I in profit.
Guy asked what my dad does, told him that my father is a civil rights attorney. He said,
"So your father works for then?"
Well, that escalated quickly. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out my other videos. Also, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and ring the notification bell.